Presence of the jury.
The only thing is, I guess they have brought in, I don't know if they're planning to bring in more than one jail official. I just want to reiterate that objection would also be anything that she heard from other people. It has to be things that she herself witnessed. And I have.
She understands that.
Okay,
Right.
I just want to make sure that that's clear.
That would be fine. We'll, in terms of her observation is what will be received into evidence. There may be excited utterances or state of mind statements that come in the course of what she observed that may be outside the scope of this ruling, but certainly this is what she observed.
And I will be also objecting, again, to preserve that objection to the relevancy to this in the rebuttal stage.
Right. That objection's noted, and we'll, if you wish to make it again when she's asked questions. That's
And
fine.
it will be based on 15A 2000, 5th, 6th, 8th, and 14th Amendments in the North Carolina Constitution, and I will say for reasons previously stated.
Yes, sir. Thank you. All right. Let's bring jury. Yes.
In terms
Yeah.
of publishing,
Yes.
the copier down here is only black and white, so what we're going to do is scan it in and try to publish it a different way. Because I think it's important that you see on page 2 that it's her, the way the color printer worked, or the color copy worked, you can't tell who it was. So we'll publish it at a later time, I guess.
That'll be fine. I'll let the jury know that they will see that exhibit at a later time then.
Your Honor, we would also be willing to, we don't dispute that it's her in that picture. So if the issue is whether or not that,
That's fine. We'll allow them to publish it. I assume what you're talking about is scan it and then put it on the screen. That's
I
fine.
needed to scan the redacted portion.
That's fine.
And just a little bit of record keeping. I'll probably be handling the objection to this witness, but Ms. D will be doing the cross-examination.
That's fine.
Yeah, I think.
Let's bring jurors, please. Further evidence for the state?
We'll call Sergeant Bay, Judge. Sorry. You go by Bay Adams, how do you want to go?
I go by Sergeant Bay.
Okay, Sergeant Bay, can you tell the jury how you're employed?
I'm employed Wake County Sheriff Department as a sergeant.
And what are some of your duties and responsibility as a sergeant with the sheriff's office? Excuse me.
I oversee the jail operation as well as the jail officers and the care of the inmates.
And how many inmates are you talking about at a given time that you might be responsible for?
Well, it depends on where I'm located. If I'm in housing, whether it's east or west, it could be up to 20 dorms, and those dorms are up to 56 inmates a pod.
Well, let me ask it this way. How many inmates are housed within the confines of the Wake County Sheriff's Office?
Are you saying per pod?
Or, no, in general, in total, if you know.
Possibly 900 per se at the Wake County Detention Center.
And are there different facilities in addition to the Wake County Detention Center?
Yes, ma'am. We have 2 facilities. So we have the Public Safety Center, and we also have the Wake County Detention Center. And so at the Public Safety Center, it's about 300 per se, maybe under. And then at the Wake County Detention Center, we have approximately 900 inmates.
When an inmate comes to the Wake County Jail, are you familiar about whether or not there are any rules or regulations that are given to them?
Definitely. Back some time ago, they were provided with a handbook, but as it stands, we now have a kiosk in the dormitories where before they fully access that, they have to read the handbook.
Okay. And so it's given, they give access to them. Do you stand there and make sure they watch it, or are you at least giving them access?
They have access.
With respect to, you said there are different types of pods or different types of dorms. I think earlier we talked to them about pods, but are pods and dorms essentially the same thing?
Yes, ma'am.
And you said that depending on where you're located, it would depend on how many people you may supervise at a certain time.
Yes, ma'am.
With respect to inmates, is it important that they follow rules?
It is very important.
And why?
That's how we maintain order.
Okay. And I was to say, why is that, to maintain order?
Yes, ma'am.
During the course of 2015, did you have occasion to come into contact with the defendant, Travion Smith?
Yes, ma'am.
And do you recall about where it was or where you were located when you first came into contact with him?
Yes, ma'am. At that time, we were, I believe, we were on the 6th floor. We were placed in the dormitory on lockdown.
Let me stop you for a second. When you're talking about the 6th floor, are we talking about the detention facility or the public safety center?
I apologize. Let me back up. So that was the Public Safety Center at the time on 6th floor, Green Pod.
And when you said you were putting the floor on lockdown, what does that mean?
Well, actually, we had an incident that occurred, and so me and the lieutenant at the time, we decided to lock that particular pod down.
And why do you want to do that?
It was in reference to the incident. We needed to review the cameras.
Okay. And so when you have an incident, why do you want to put folks on lockdown?
Well, for this particular incident, it was in reference to an inmate turning off the television, and no one wanted to admit who did that. We don't punish the whole pod. So at the time, we wanted to lock down the pod so we can review the cameras and then come back to take care of that particular individual.
And strategically speaking, when a pod is on lockdown, are inmates free to come and go, or what happens?
When a pod, no. When they're on lockdown, they are behind the doors until they're able to come off lockdown.
And earlier we had some testimony from some inmates that they're single cells. Are all of the ones in 6th floor at the safety center single cells?
Correct, yes.
And so when you put all of the folks on lockdown, are they allowed to come out into the common areas at that point?
No. We have assistance most of the time we have assistance when we're locking the inmates down, when there's a situation occurring.
And when you call it lockdown, are the doors actually locked, or they're just supposed to go back to their rooms?
We ask them to stand near their doors, we unlock the doors, and the officers, we assist them into their cells.
Okay. And then are they physically locked?
Yes, when we close them, they are locked at the time.
And with respect to the incident on the 6th floor in the Public Safety Center, do you recall when that was? Have you had a chance to review some records?
I did. This one was February 21st.
And once the inmates were put on lockdown, what, if anything, did you notice about this defendant?
Well, with this particular incident, like I said, it was February 21st. It was approximately 9:44 in the morning. We request that the pod, we request the inmates to go back to their cells. As we were trying to lock down one by one, this particular inmate refused to go back to his cell.
And where was he when he was refusing to go back, if you recall?
He was in the day room.
Okay. And what happened when you noticed that he refused to go to his cell?
He had some choice words to use.
And specifically, do you recall what he said?
He basically told me he wasn't going to his fucking room.
Okay. And what do you do at that point?
Well, I mean, I gave him another warning. He still refused. And so at that time, I used one burst of OC spray for him to comply.
And when you say OC spray, what does that mean?
It is a pepper spray provided to the officers to use
And
when inmates are not in compliance.
with your training, do you have training about how to use the pepper spray?
Yes, ma'am.
And once you said it's one burst, is it really like just a,
Yes,
tapping
I
your
use
finger?
I use one burst. I pulled it one time.
and what happened at that point?
The inmate turned his face, and so I did not spray him directly. It caught the side of his face, but we removed him from the pod so he can be decontaminated,
And what do you mean by decontaminated?
so he can go ahead and take a shower to wash off the chemicals.
When you were removing him from the pod, did he make any comments to you?
No, ma'am. I allowed the DRT, which is our detention response team officers, handle that situation.
In addition to him telling you, I'm not going to my effing room, did he say anything else to you at
He
that time?
did. He said he was just trying to have a peaceful protest.
And are peaceful protests in that form allowed?
No, ma'am.
And
it's
why is
like
that?
That is in a form of almost forming a riot.
Objection to the characterization.
Sustain.
Motion to strike.
Jurors to disregard the characterization.
Why do you not allow inmates to refuse to go on lockdown when you've ordered a lockdown?
Excuse me, can you repeat that?
Objection.
I'm sorry,
Sure.
I'm not sure I followed the question.
If an inmate wants to stay in the day room rather than going to his cell or his or her cell on lockdown, why don't you let them stay out there?
They're not allowed to stay when we give them orders. And so when they violate those orders, you're disrespecting the staff.
And is profanity allowed to be directed towards staff in the Wake County Jail?
Definitely not, ma'am. We don't use that, and we don't expect them to use that type of language either.
How would you describe his demeanor when he told you he wasn't going to his room?
Objection.
Overruled. You may describe what you observed.
He appeared to be nonchalant. He was very defiant at the time.
Objection to characterization.
I'll be glad to ask a further question. Why would
Right,
you,
I'm going to sustain the objection, just what you observed.
why would you describe him as defiant?
Because he refused to follow my orders, and it took for me to use my spray to have him comply.
Once he was taken away to be decontaminated, do you know whether there were any disciplinary actions that were
Objection.
taken as a result of this?
The reasons previously stated and your previous ordinance.
Right. Overruled as to that question.
Do you know whether or not there were any disciplinary actions that followed?
There is. According to the handbooks, they have certain rules to follow. If they do not follow those rules, they do list that they can be locked down.
And do you have personal knowledge of what happened with this defendant once he was taken for decontamination?
I do, ma'am.
And-
He did.
Same ground.
Same grounds and confrontation.
I asked if she had personal knowledge.
Right. Overruled to the extent you have personal knowledge.
What happened?
Not based solely on records that you've reviewed, but actually that you observed or knew of or participated in person.
Okay. I did not participate in his hearing.
Okay. So when you have a disciplinary action that's enforced, is there actually a hearing on that at some
Ye-
later date?
Yes, ma'am.
And
There
are you,
is.
and do you participate in that?
I do not, ma'am.
Did he come back to that 6th floor unit that day?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
We sent them to the ninth.
Sustained.
Okay.
And did you have another incident with the defendant?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
And when was that?
That was October 26, 2015, at approximately 11:55.
And between February 21st and October 26th of 2015, did you have much interaction with this defendant?
I did not, ma'am, because I was moved to another facility. So I was moved from the Public Safety Center to the Wake County Detention Center.
And on October 26, 2015, can you tell us what, if anything, drew your attention to the defendant?
Yes, ma'am. This particular day and morning, I went in to conduct a supervisory round.
And what does that mean?
It means just to oversee the security, make sure the inmates are in good health and alive, of course, and that the officer's doing what he or she need to be doing. So
And what, if anything, did you notice about the defendant on that day?
I did not until I was going to exit the pod.
Okay.
Before I can exit the pod, he said, "Bye, bae." And so I advised him not to play with my name, and when he addressed me, he is to address me by Sergeant Bay.
And is that something that is told to the inmates when they come into the Wake County Jail, that is how to refer to particular staff members?
We do remind them that we're officers, or they may ask for our name, Sergeant. We do tell them.
And what, if anything, was the defendant's response when you told him not to play, or whatever the word was used?
Well, he quoted verbatim to get the fuck out of his face and told me bye.
And that was in response to you talking to him about calling you bae?
Yes, ma'am.
And when he told you to get the fuck out of his face, bye, what happened at that point?
I called for assistance to have him removed out of the dormitory for disrespecting me.
And did he have any response that you're personally aware of when he was being locked or put in handcuffs?
He admitted to the other sergeant that was helping me that he did do those things, and that at that point...
As to what he said to the other sergeant.
Sustained unless you were witnessing this yourself.
I was present in the Sally board at that time before we departed.
And what, if anything, did you hear the defendant say?
He just, he admitted to what he said to the other sergeant. And at that point, I don't know what was said further because we were separated at that point.
How would you describe his demeanor when he was talking to you about getting the fuck out of your face?
He was in front of other inmates, so it appeared as if he was trying to show off.
And why do you say it that way?
But he's being sarcastic, so...
And again, are inmates allowed to use profanity?
No, ma'am.
To your knowledge, did he come back to that? And you said at this point you're in the detention center, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Did he come back to that particular unit to your knowledge?
No, ma'am.
And again, do you know whether or not there were disciplinary hearings connected with this matter?
There was a hearing with us.
And were you present at that hearing?
I was not.
Other than those two incidents, did you have much interaction at all with the defendant?
No, ma'am.
Cross-examination, Ms. D.
I just want to ask you a few questions. First about the incident back in February.
Yes, ma'am.
So that was a conflict about whether or not everyone was going to be on lockdown because the TV had the channel changed.
What happened was one of the inmates took upon themselves to change the TV. And so no one wanted to admit to who changed the television. And so at that point, my lieutenant and I, which I was given orders to lock down the pod so we can go review the camera.
Right. So so that's what it was. Someone had changed the channel, and that's not allowed.
Right.
And that's what the issue was.
Correct.
And
that's what the issue stemmed from. Yes, ma'am.
And Mr. Smith was indicating that he didn't think it was fair that everyone be put on lockdown because of that.
Yes, ma'am.
And so he was saying, I'm having a peaceful protest and I'm going to stay here at this table because I don't think this is fair.
Well, pretty much he was using profanity. He said he was not going back to his room after I advised that's where he had to go for the time being.
And the other thing he was saying is that he wanted to have a peaceful protest.
He ended it with, I was just trying to have a peaceful protest.
And you said that you just sprayed him one time with the spray. And that's pepper spray.
Yes, ma'am.
And you said that it was only to sort of the side of his face.
Well, he turned his face, so did not have direct contact. So it caught the side of his face, his right side of his face.
And one spray of that spray is significant to have an impact, correct? You feel one, if you feel one spray of OC spray or pepper spray, it has an impact.
Yes and no. It depends.
Um,
It varies among different individuals. I mean, it may affect some more than others, so I really can't answer that, ma'am.
But it's the type of spray that people use as an alternative, like for a type of mace, but individuals will carry around with them for self-protection.
Correct.
And the other incident I just wanted to ask you about briefly, your last name is Bay.
Correct.
You said that inmates are told that they're supposed to speak to people with perhaps their rank or the officer or sergeant or whatever and their last name.
Yes, ma'am.
But there's a particularly sort of strong prohibition on people using your first names. Is that correct?
No, they are not aware of our first name, ma'am.
Right. So the last name is the name they know.
Yes, ma'am.
And what Travion said in this instance was "by Bay."
Correct.
And you took offense at that.
I wouldn't say take offense. I just corrected him by saying you're not to address me that way, that it is Sergeant Bay.
And you said that you got the impression that him even saying anything was him sort of trying to like show off in front of people.
Well, he was in front of other inmates at the time. So they all were standing near the exit. Before I can exit, he said, "Bye, Bay." And it was the way he said it. But I did address him, so I didn't want to jump to conclusion and corrected him. But that's when he told me to get the F out of his face.
And that was around the same time he was being handcuffed in the Sally Port.
It was not. That was before I can exit. We were having a conversation. So before I exit, these were the words exchanged. And at that point, I called for assistance to have him removed.
And so then he was handcuffed in the Sally Port as he
Correct.
was being removed.
Correct.
I don't have any other questions, Your Honor.
Redirect. Ma'am, you may step down.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Further evidence for the state?
State calls Officer Sill.
Would you place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right, please? Do you solemnly swear the testimony you give this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. Please be seated.
Please state your name, sir.
Dylan Sill.
And how are you employed currently?
I work with the Wake County Sheriff Office.
How long have you been working with the Wake County Sheriff's Office?
2 years, 1 month.
And right now, that is today, what are some of your duties and responsibilities?
I work in processing. I usually book people in.
And is that what processing is? When someone comes into the jail, you book them in?
Yes, ma'am. I also do bond package too.
Bond packages?
Yes, ma'am.
I want to turn your attention back to October of 2014. Were you employed in that capacity or in a different one with the Wake County Sheriff's Office?
I was working in a dorm at that time.
And can you tell us what some of your responsibilities were when you worked in a dorm?
Yes, ma'am. Provide safety and security for individuals, inmates and staff. Also feed and make sure to take their prescription.
When a person is assigned to a particular dorm, how many other detention officers would you work with on a given day?
There's only one detention officer to up to 56 inmates in a pod.
And you had said earlier that you want to make sure that there's safety and security. Why is that important when there's one person working with 56 people?
Because anything else can escalate, and there's only one officer at that time. So if something happens, then we must act on it immediately.
With respect to your duties back in October of 2014, did you have occasion to come into contact with the defendant on October 9th of 2014?
Yes, ma'am.
And can you tell the jury what drew your attention to the defendant on that day?
Him and another inmate was in a heated argument, and I told them to separate and calm down.
Objection to reasons previously stated.
Overruled.
You can answer that, sorry.
Inmate Smith, he went to his room, and then the other inmate went to the back. And then after a couple of minutes, inmate Smith ran to the back and confronted the other inmate, and that's when I called all available, which means every available staff to come to that dorm for emergency due to a conflict was about to occur.
And when you first encountered the defendant and another inmate and told them to go to their rooms, why did you do that?
So that they can calm down, cool down, and also it gives me the chance to make sure that they're in their rooms safely and away from each other.
And do you know if the defendant went to his own room for a period of time?
Yes, ma'am, he did.
And what was the next thing that you saw from him?
He came back out, and then he went to the back to confront the inmate, the other individual.
It was that the same person you had
Yes, ma'am.
concerns about in the beginning?
Yes, ma'am.
And what happened when he went? How close would you say he got to the inmate before you called for all available?
There was basically face-to-face at that time.
And did they appear, how would you describe their demeanor, that is, how they looked?
They was really upset with each other. Basically was mad at each other for something.
And when you call the all available, how quickly are people supposed to respond?
Within a couple seconds or minutes.
And did some other folks come over to
Yes,
assist
ma'am.
you? At that point, what happened to the defendant and the other inmate?
Well, inmate Smith was placed back in his dorm and placed under lockdown 24-hour. And then the other individual was escorted out to another pod.
And why would you separate the two, that is, to another pod?
Because then to prevent another confrontation.
When we heard a little earlier from Sergeant Bay about some things are referred to a disciplinary hearing, when you put an inmate on 24-hour lockdown, can you do that yourself?
Yes, ma'am.
And when they're on a 24-hour lockdown, what are they allowed to do during that 24 hours?
Nothing really. Since he was in one Fox, he just stays in his cell.
And is that for 24 total hours?
Yes, ma'am.
I don't have any other questions, thank you.
Cross-examination.
Thank you, Ryan. Officer, so Mr. Smith and this other person, they were upset with each other that day.
Yes, ma'am.
So they were having a heated disagreement,
Yes, ma'am.
a verbal disagreement.
Yes, ma'am.
And so you asked them to go to their cells.
I asked him to separate.
And Mr. Smith went to his cell,
Yes, ma'am.
and the other guy stayed out in the day room.
He went to the very back.
Okay.
Mhm.
And then sometime later, Mr. Smith came out and came up, and did they have another
Yes,
verbal
ma'am.
disagreement?
Inmate Smith, he went to the back to confront the other individual.
But there was no physical fight.
No, ma'am.
I don't have any other questions, Your Honor.
Anything further, Mr. Q? All right, thank you, sir. You may step down. Will there be further evidence for the state?
Sir.
All right.
Just has to publish that document in a moment.
Right, I neglected to mention that to members of the jury, the exhibit that was to be published to you, I think it's being arranged, it'll be published on the screen in just a moment. Yes. All right. Thank you.
I don't know that the jurors could actually see them. We could also publish the black and white copies.
That's fine. If you'll hand those to the bailiff, please. Evidence on rebuttal. Is there rebuttal evidence? All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the evidence portion of this second phase of this trial. And as I indicated yesterday, we're going to go ahead and release you for the day. There are several steps that remain before you begin your deliberation of this matter. Those will be the closing arguments of counsel and then my instructions to you on the law that you are to apply to this second phase. Prior to that, as I mentioned, I need to confer with counsel about the instructions I'll be giving you. That'll take us a bit of time to do. So we'll go ahead and release you for the day, ask you to return at 9:30 on Monday morning, and we expect that shortly thereafter we should be in a position to move forward with the closing arguments. All of the rules and instructions continue to be very important. Don't talk about this case among yourselves or with anyone else. Please don't form or express any opinions about the outcome. No media or independent investigation in these matters, and no conversations with parties, witnesses, or lawyers. Leave your materials in the chairs. The bailiff will take up the exhibit that you've just reviewed, and we'll keep your notebook safe over the weekend. So thank you all very much for your service. We'll see you Monday at 9:30. Everyone else, please remain seated. All right, outside the presence of the jury. Yes, ma'am.
Just before I forget, would you, I marked this SB-1 out of your concern for the jury being able to view it. Do you think it would be appropriate to put that in the court file?
That'll be fine.
So it's just a black and white copy. Thank you. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I know.
No, that's, my question is, are there any matters that we need to take up before we move to the topic of the jury instructions?
Yes, and Your Honor, I think we talked about it. We did work last night in getting mitigating circumstances, but we do need some time. We each sort of separately began working, and I think we can come up with a list, but if we could, I think, take a lunch break time, and we should be able to finish it all. We have been working diligently, I can tell you, on that, but it is a complicated process.
No, I understand. That's fine. That was really my question was, is there anything preliminarily that would be helpful to talk about before we take that break? If not, we'll just go ahead and break and then convene at some point later on and move forward with the charge conference. Anything for the state?
Not in terms of instructions preliminarily, I think ours are a little more straightforward.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, then we'll just go ahead and recess. Let's regroup at 2 o'clock, and that should give everybody time to work and also grab a little lunch. We'll gather at 2 o'clock then, and we'll convene a charge conference at that time. Very well.
And
Yes.
Madam Clerk, if we email our proposed mitigating circumstances to you, will you be able to print it for us?
That would be helpful.
Yes, that would be really helpful for us.
All right, that's fine. We'll be in recess till 2 o'clock.